We formally start now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who have joined from different parts of the globe. On behalf of Terry's Center for Sustainable Mobility, I, Sharif Kamar, would like to welcome you all on this webinar on the topic impact of COVID-19 on urban mobility. This webinar aims to bring together experts from different countries to understand how mobility patterns might be altered globally due to the current pandemic, what factors affect uh, this transition, and appropriate policy responses that are necessary. Before we start the session, some housekeeping announcements. For panelists, it will be great if you could mute your microphones when you're not speaking. And also, you can turn off the camera in case you find your videos freezing. We have received several questions during the registration process, which we will try to accommodate during the Q&A session. We will also try to accommodate questions from the participants who have raised their questions via the chat box. Moving towards the discussion, I would like to invite our moderator for the session, Mr. Shri Prakash. He joined Terry in 2011 as Distinguished Fellow after a long and distinguished service in Indian Railways. His association with Terry goes back to 2003 and 4 as a visiting senior fellow. He has been leading a number of projects related to public transport, cycling, railways, electric mobility, informal systems, and freight transportation. His specializations include operations planning, zero-emission technology, and safety of the transportation systems. We have also joined with and who will be the first speaker, Dr. Anvita Arora. She is an architect and transport planner with a PhD from the Civil Engineering Department of IIT Delhi. She is currently the Program Director of the Transport and Urban Infrastructure Vertical of CAPSAC, an energy and economics research think tank based in Saudi Arabia. Before joining CAPSAC, she was the MD and CEO of Innovative Transport Solutions, iTrans, an incubator company of IIT Delhi. She has also been teaching transport planning in several universities like SPA, Delhi, Terry School of Advanced Studies, and Ansals University, Gurgaon. She was associated with TRIP IIT Delhi for a long period of time, for nearly 12 years. Welcome, Dr. Anvita. Our next speaker will be Professor Graham Currie. He is Professor Public Transport and Director Public Transport Research Group, Monash University, Melbourne. In 2015, PTRG was identified as one of the top 3 research groups in the world in this area. He is chair of the Light Rail Transit Committee at US Transportation Research Board, a board member of Singapore LTA Research Advisory Board, and the Swedish Research Center for Research on Public Transport. He is also involved in the successful researching transit podcast series, and currently leading a research program exploring long-term impacts of COVID-19 on travel. So welcome, sir. We have also fortunate to have joined with Professor Geetam Tiwari as our final speaker. She is MOUD chairperson in the Department of Civil Engineering and TRIP IIT Delhi. Professor Tiwari obtained Master of Urban Planning and Policy and PhD in Transport Planning and Policy from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She has been working in the area of traffic and transport planning and traffic safety, focusing on pedestrians, bicycles, and bus systems. She has worked with city, state, and central government on public transport and road safety projects in India. She has over 100 publications in peer-reviewed journals and has co-edited 4 books on transport planning and safety. Welcome, Professor Tiwari. Before we move on to the discussion, as I said, I would be quick on, I would like to present some of the findings of the survey that we conducted in April. I would be quick on this. The detailed report is available on Terry's website, and I would urge all the participants to have a look on this. So I'll just move on quickly to the presentation before I hand over to Mr. Shri Prakash. So this study, this survey study that we did was an online survey conducted during the period of April 4 and 26, 2020, and we got responses from across 51 cities in India. We wanted to understand some of the questions that we had before, as soon as the lockdown happened, in terms of the suspense related to most activities in cities and its impact on environmental benefits. Increased perceived risk related to traveling in public transport, limited capacity in buses and metros already existing in India and other countries as well, and what would be the effect of such lockdown on the same, and will the perception of public transport, perception of people on public transport be changed in future. This survey covered a wide variety of people in terms of gender, as well as so it's both well represented in terms of gender. uh, it also captures a lot of middle and high income group, as I mentioned during our discussion before the formal start. A large part of the sample consisted of people employed in the service sector. uh, in terms of the impact, a number of people indicated that there will be a large and this indicates in terms of there will be a large decrease in buses and metros as preferred mode of travel. There is also expectation of decrease in public transport share compensated by increase in private vehicle and intermediate public transport, and you can see it in the chart on the left. The blue refers to preference before COVID, and orange represents post-COVID preference for mobility. There is also a perception in terms of increase in non-motorized modes like cycling and pedestrian. So when we look at who are the metro users and bus users and where will they go, 20% of the metro users would shift to private modes. 64% of them said that they will stick to metro as their primary mode of transport. For the buses, 11% of the bus users would shift to IPT services such as auto rickshaw and taxis. We also got fairly large sample from three main cities, Bangalore, Kolkata, and Delhi, and we analyzed it separately. 12% indicated that there will be in Bangalore, they will prefer auto rickshaws and taxis. These were responses by women. 10% increase in percentage of public personal car in Kolkata, increase in modal share for NMT, especially cycling across cities. There was a 13% decrease in in metro users in Delhi NCR, 16% decrease in the share of metro usage by female commuters in Delhi NCR. We also had a small part on covering the online grocery and food delivery mechanism in India. So there is, we see that there is a a decline that is expected in the online food ordering, but there is an increase in grocery shopping that we have seen also seen in the recent times. So with this, I would end my presentation and I hand over the session to Mr. Shipakash. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharif. As you see that urban mobility has been always a concern in Indian cities, and for a variety of reasons. One is the increasing congestion because of the private vehicles. The cars have been, cars and both the two-wheelers have been increasing at the rate of 10% in the cities. And because of that, the congestions and though still we have got a very small car users and the two-wheelers users, but still, they cause a lot of concern, and most of our public policies has been rather skewed towards the investments on say flyovers, which are helping more the motorized transport than non-motorized transport. Yes, there have been some investment on the public transport systems also, particularly metros. And I personally feel that buses would have been much more beneficial investment wise if we would have gone for the buses, because the number of buses either are steady or declining in our cities. Now this though this particular survey is skewed towards the high income groups, or middle income groups particularly, because those are the people who have replied on the on our online questionnaire. But still it looks like that all those people who have been using cars and two-wheelers would in any case would stick to those non-motorized transport. And at the same time, there may be some other users also which are now not using it, but may be inclined to use both the cars as well as the two-wheelers. And then other day I was reading some kind of a say assessment that the sale of the used cars may go up in India, and not only the new cars but only even the used cars. So with all these, you know, these business means that whatever the little effort which we have made towards the sustainable mobility and improving the sustainable mobility and making our systems, cities free of the air pollution, because a lot of vehicular pollution is a source of the air pollution in cities. And well, there may be some setback for that. Now, keeping that in view, we wanted to understand the views of our experts here, and distinguished experts, you know, who have been working in the area for years and years. And actually there are few questions which have been bothering us, and we thought that we will seek your views on that. First, of course, is that what would be the likely impact of the COVID-19 on mobility pattern in the cities? Because there could be two views. Everything may become normal as before. After this impact of the lockdown say is over, or even because there may be some lack of the choices also before the people. Second, of course, is that and all those city transport policies are basically country specific. Then maybe that country specific policies maybe also influence this shift towards the private transport. That is what we also would like to understand from you. And of course, is that what will happen to the long-term impact on the public transport and non-motorized transport, particularly because of this post-COVID. Will there be any impact, or there may not be any impact at all? And lastly, that what should be the response of the policymakers? Because after all, the transport policies are also their concern, and they have been talking about sustainability. What would be their response? What should be their response towards all this? So with all these questions in mind, we thought of this webinar, and we have invited the experts, and also and we have got a lot of questions also from our participants. That is good news which I can share with you. And well, in this, not saying much now, well, I invite Anvita. You know, Anvita is the expert on our urban transport systems. You know, he has done a lot of work in the cities. Anvita, then what could be your views on all this? Anvita?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Shri Prakash, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Terry, for inviting us. It's not only a pleasure, it's a deep honor to be on the same panel as people who are not only my mentors for a very long time, as Dr. Tiwari is, but also form a substantial part of the reference list of all the papers that I've published. So Dr. Graham, Currie, and others. So it's a deep pleasure. I think to take some of the questions that you've mentioned and turn it around a little bit. So one of the things that we've been seeing in the last few months are a lot of reports of emissions coming down, and the spaces being reclaimed by the city, by pedestrians, etc. So there's a lot of good things that we are seeing: clearer skies, people are taking picture, posting on WhatsApp, and that there have been some gains in sustainability or sustainable mobility that we've had in our city during COVID. And I know that it's a catastrophe, and we are seeing a lot of negatives that are coming out for people, but I want to take the opportunity to point out a few opportunities that are coming out of this catastrophe. One is, as we are seeing some of the European cities doing, is that they are investing a lot in non-motorized transport. So walking and cycling. Walking and cycling are personal modes of transport. So if we want to talk about social distancing, we want to talk about, people having personal mobility, then the best way to do that is to invest in walking and cycling. And there are cities who right now, because there is very less traffic on the road, there are cities who are taking the opportunity to create that kind of infrastructure, that when the lockdowns open, when people start getting into a normal working situation, those choices are available to people. So I think that opportunity is a great opportunity for cities to do that right now. And I think the second opportunity is which, while the survey that you pointed out is showing the impact of public transport ridership on the big cities, I know that a lot of smaller cities or mid-sized cities have been investing or trying to invest in public transport at this point of time. And I want to, take the example of Riyadh, where I'm based right now. And Riyadh, we've invested in 176 kilometers of metro and 10 times that length of bus transit systems. And one of the big issues that we thought would be when we open these lines is that we'd have very low ridership. And now in the COVID situation, we are thinking, oh, that's such a great opportunity that we are starting with a low ridership, because low ridership, as Graham had pointed out in the discussions we were having before that, low ridership is mandatory. We want low ridership right now. So it's a great opportunity. But with the economic downturn and the fact that we need mobility options for people, we would see that ridership build up. And as the city creates spaces around it, walking and cycling and transit-oriented development, mixed land use, we build the city around it and increase the ridership. So I think there are opportunities for the city authorities, for the urban transport investors and designers to use this opportunity to create the right kind of system. And we have to remember, while we are talking about, very easily that people would move to personal modes of transport, we have to remember the economic impact of COVID, which is much more than the health impact of COVID. And there will be people who will be left without mobility options. And worrying about what we are doing for them should be the primary concern if we are looking at economic recovery in the post-COVID situation. So yes, while at some level the situation is bleak, but I think it would be great if we could highlight some of these opportunities. And the last question that you had said, what can the cities do? I think there's a lot that the cities can do, and there's a lot that the cities are doing. And there's hope for still keeping our sustainable mobility drive that we've had for a long time, to keep it moving and keep it moving in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks a lot, Anvita. Yes, each major crisis also offer the opportunities. So I agree with you that COVID-19 also does the same. And yes, we look for the opportunities which it offers to increase the sustainable mobility in our cities. And before I go to Professor Graham Currie, I would like to, those participants who have joined late will be sharing this presentation which Sharif has made to everyone, to all the participants. So that would be doing that. So even if you have missed it, you will get it through your email, which you have shared. Now our next speaker will be Professor Currie, and again he's also presenting, and in fact he's also done a lot of his studies on the repercussions of the COVID on our public transport systems. So Professor Currie.
Thanks very much there. Well, it's great to be part of this discussion. We are, as has been said, doing research on this topic with very different results, which is interesting, even more interesting than the results from the Terry Institute. This is not the first time the world has had a pandemic, and some cities have had really bad pandemics. And here is some data from the SARS epidemic, which is data from Hong Kong and Taipei metros. Both those cities were very badly hit by SARS. In both cases, after 3 months, their ridership returned. And indeed, their ridership has been very robust since then. So we have some data already on a pandemic. SARS, of course, is related to the COVID virus. It's not quite the same. But what's another interesting fact about SARS is there is no antidote to SARS yet. In fact, the SARS epidemic just ended. And so, you know, it could return, but it didn't really have a long-term effect, a very different outcome than has been found in the Currie study. We at Monash University of Australia have run our own study. An important difference I'd like to point out is that there are 4 phases of COVID. 4. There's before the pandemic, there's during shutdown, which is where India is now, largely, when you really have to all stay at home. And then there is a post-shutdown period where the epidemic is still around, where you need social distancing. And there, travel really is very unusual because you can't run public transport systems really to any capacity. But our research has been focusing on phase 4, which is when a solution is found and there's no longer any risk of infection. So for us, post-pandemic literally means there is no pandemic, much like there is no SARS now. And this is our question we asked of our people in the survey. We said, post-pandemic, when there's no longer a risk of infection, will you use public transport? And this is the responses we got from our survey. Literally, for every single person we talked to, they said that as long as there was no infection, they would be happy to use public transport. A very different result from the Currie study. Then we've looked at a lot of travel behavior research. Luckily, for some reasons, we seem to have specialized in disruption research, when railways go wrong, this sort of thing. And what's interesting about all of this is there's already been research on SARS in Asia. We've had security threats which have really created fear. And one of the key things we're looking for here is what's called residual fear. See, fear is a very fluid problem, and certainly during a major pandemic in somewhere like India, I think that will be a very big issue. The media is full of the issue. Everybody's concerned about it. And I think that that's a bad time to ask people what the reality will be in the future, because all they can think about is fear. And previous research has already looked at this for things like security threats. There has also been many planned disruptions in transport systems, and we know what the evidence on that is, and that there is evidence that different people have got a certain ability to change, but a lot of people have not got an ability to change their travel habits. And the other factor here is that our economies are all hurting now. And of course, we've had global financial crisis before, and we've already understood what the transport impacts of those are. And in summary, I can tell you that these impacts from all of these disruptions in previous research are all, in general, quite small in the medium to long term. There are no long-term lasting evidence in these sources. So we have a dilemma here. We have the Currie study pointing in one direction, and we have the evidence from both our study from the previous pandemics and also from travel behavior research, suggesting, long-term impacts aren't quite as big as that. I would like to point out that your study method in Currie was a self-reported response from people about what they think their future will be during a major pandemic, when your media is full of war and stories of drought and the end of the world. Not a good time to get a reasoned response from people. The second point I would make is, as you would have no choice, you would have to have a sample online. And that is naturally going to be the people that have wealth, which is, you agreed with that. Now, those are the people that have choice. What you haven't talked to is the vast majority that don't have a choice. And I would conclude just to say that, you know, travel is about land use in cities, and the land use in cities is not changing. Travel is about the people that are there and how many there are, where they live and where they work. That is not changing either. Travel is also about the transport systems that are built in your cities, where the infrastructure in and what modes are available. They are not changing, and they'll still be there after post-COVID. So I think there's a more positive picture here that we're very likely to return to the bad old days, I'm afraid, of, you know, cities that are going to be facing environmental challenges. There's a danger from the work from Terry that there may be more car use, which is very bad. And I'd like to just conclude by saying that this is not really about transport, you know, it's about whether we have cities and whether they can be successful at size. Our trends have all been for urbanization and mega cities, and those cities cannot exist without public transport systems. So, you know, as long as we find a solution to the pandemic, I think there's a very high likelihood we'll go back to travel behaviors before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. In fact, it is very interesting, you know, and you have illuminated about your earlier study, and it is rather a very good outcome, you know, because we can take that also into account when the policymakers make their decisions, you know, and rather it is very encouraging that the public transport systems would be again become popular, you know, that despite all these fears which the people may have in their mind as of now. Thank you very much, Professor. And now I come to the Professor Geetam Tiwari. And I don't think that there is any other expert who knows much more than the Professor Geetam Tiwari. So she has been working so long and on this, and I'm rather fortunate to know her. You know, and then, and as Anvita was also her PhD, she has done a PhD, and him. And I also know a large number of the scholars, you know, who have benefited from her, and also still a very large number of people working with her. So that's that is very good, you know, to them. And then again, Professor Tiwari, this you would like to share your views with us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sri Prakash. And whatever you said happens when you grow old. So that only shows that I'm quite senior now. So, okay, it's wonderful to be on this webinar. Let me share my screen because I thought I'll just put together some, I think you all can see the screen now. Yes, so I think first thing I want to bring to your attention is that travel is all about employment opportunities in our urban areas.
Ma'am, your screen is not visible.
The screen is not visible?
Yes, yes, kindly share it.
I already shared it. Okay, just one moment, I'll just do it again.
Yes.
1 moment, I'll just do share screen. Yeah. Okay, is it visible now?
Yes, yes, now.
Yeah. This is okay now?
Yeah, it is okay.
All right. So I think first thing I would like to bring to your attention is that travel is about work opportunities in cities. And this is one thing very different in this current pandemic, especially in India, and India, like other countries. I think India is completely unique in this situation, that our work opportunities have been severely disrupted. And this also happens because a lot of work in our cities is in informal sector. Unlike, okay, work opportunities are affected everywhere, but the kind of dependence we have on informal sector is what is unique, and that is going to have long-term impacts on our travel patterns now. So far, I think the Terry study, that what you discussed is mostly that work pattern changes may happen in formal sector. And your study also showed that some people are saying that they could prefer to work from home, but that's overall a very small sector in our country. And the second point is extremely important, that here informal sector services are severely disrupted. And this happens for two reasons. I mean, one very important reason is that there is a very strong symbiotic relationship between formal and informal employment. So that whole relationship has been disrupted right now. And there is huge reduction in demand in our urban sector. Demand of all kinds. And therefore, this travel is also going to be impacted. And the other last point that I thought I will also discuss a little bit, but Graham already discussed this. There is a lot of uncertainty, fear of infection, and perception of insecurity, but probably these are transitory. We may come over these as time passes. I don't think these are going to be permanent, so it is more, they may have an impact in the short term, probably not in the long term. So if I just try to understand what may happen in places like India. So as you can see, this is our travel patterns, both male and female. And 49% people are already traveling pedestrians and bicycles. So these are anyway your individual modes. The unfortunate part is that this is going to be disrupted now because our informal economy has been interrupted. The kind of, all of us have seen the kind of situation that we've got into now. The people moving away from cities back to rural areas, it's a distress, reverse migration, or one could say de-urbanization of our many of our regions. And this kind of scenes we have not experienced. People try to equate it to partition times, 70 years back. And some people said even at that time, we did not see scenes like this. So this is going to cause a major disruption, at least up to medium term. This is already a 49% of the trips. So the so-called sustainable modes, in our case, these were the captive users. This has been disrupted now. The other more formal trips which has been captured, which is about impact of work from home. This will have some impact on car trips. Your study shows that some people will end up increasing that, using more cars and more motorized two-wheelers, maybe reduction in bus trips and metro trips. But remember, overall, this is a very small proportion. And there may be a trade-off between some people prefer to work or continue to work from home versus reduction in public transport trips. But then if you want less crowding in public transport, probably it plays off not too badly. I think so most important question we have to understand is the difference between captive users versus choice users. And their travel is basically dependent on how our economy picks up. Land use is fixed, that's not going to change. But a lot is dependent on what happens to our economy. So for captive users, let's take the example of Delhi. These are the trends, work trips in Delhi. Captive users again walk plus bicycles, and plus 60% even bus users in Delhi are captive users. They don't have any choices. So if the economy picks up, then this people walking, bicycling, and 60% of the bus users would again start picking up these numbers. Currently, it's majorly disrupted because of disruption in economy and activities in urban areas. Choice users are about 40% bus users because they have any other vehicle, about 70% metro users because they do have access to cars and motorized two-wheelers, and cars and motorized two-wheeler users. So their impact is going to be whether what, first of all, how quickly they get over the fear of infection, etc. And a lot of it, I think, for this segment of users would be what Graham showed earlier. Very quickly, maybe in a couple of years or maybe even less than that, we may come back to the same level of demand as earlier. So last thing then, I think we have to look at what are the expected trends and key challenges. As I discussed earlier, that walking and bicycle trips are linked heavily to informal employment opportunities. As and when economy improves, captive walking and bicycle trips will increase. It will also increase because many of the current bus users who also belong to low income segment would not have the kind of incomes that they have today. There is going to be loss of income. So they would also become captive walkers and bicyclers. So at some level, we will have to prepare for increased walking and bicycle trips in medium to long term because of this, because eventually there will be distress migration back to cities. You talk to any urban experts and they will tell you, despite all these talks about today, that we will do skill mapping and we will have more local employment. No, it is not possible. Talk to any urban experts. If this was the case, then in the world, we would not have the kind of urbanization which happened with progress in economy and GDP. By definition, urban areas provide you opportunities for huge different levels of skills, which is not possible in rural areas. So this part we will have to understand very carefully, especially today we are only 30% urbanized. If 20 to 30% work from home continues, car and motorized two-wheeler trips may reduce or remain unchanged, but only for a short time. I think quickly we may come back to our same level of demand as earlier. I think this is a time where we should prepare for augmenting bus fleets to achieve level of service A or B. That means you don't want congested buses, which we have today. And you don't want congestion in metro. So we should prepare for that. If you want to retain these, not just captive users, but if we want to retain even people, 60% choice users in metro and 40% choice users in buses. But that will only happen if we are able to augment fleet. So I think most important thing we have to remind ourselves for situations like India is this very, very strong linkage with what happens to our economy, what we do to revive our economy. That is clearly that is what is going to impact on travel in cities and in general what happens in cities, not just travel, but the health of the city overall. So, and I think there is not enough understanding on this. We should really devote time on looking into these aspects. So, this is what I wanted to highlight in the beginning, and let's see what kind of questions we get there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Tiwari. And of course, you know that the informal economy particularly, and not only the general economy, has been affected a lot, and it will take time to come back to the earlier situation again. And of course, you know that transport is would be depend on the economic revival, and sooner it is better. Now, I agree with you that in the country there is not much choice. The people have to, and since the choices are very little, that very few people, and and then also there is one other factor which transportation cost. Transportation cost in the cities is fairly high, and not everybody can afford it. So this means that they have to, they willy-nilly, that they go for the non-motorized transport, and that is a very good welcome the thing, that, and we should rather encourage it, and we should provide more investment on that. And Professor Tiwari, I'll come back on investment on the public transport systems once again to you. And before that, I will go to Professor Currie, sorry. And I will ask him about this work from home. You know that whether this work from home, which is going to be a new normal, because we have seen what has been the impact of this work from home now. And it will be good that we stick to the work from home to a large extent. And will this concept have a large scale impact or significant impact on the transport demand?
Good question. Of all the likely factors that could change demand, I do think work from home is likely to be the largest. However, if you look at any of the research in teleworking, and there's quite a lot of research in this, Pat Mokhtarian had a great presentation last week in the United States on this. You know, there's very little impact, very little evidence of very sustainable long-term effects here. Only some people can work from home. They tend to be the people that are wealthier. Also, those people can't work every day. And also, only some employers don't like that. There is a cost to having the infrastructure to allow them to work from home, and you miss a lot of interaction with other workers. So I think you're right. I think this is likely to have the biggest impact, but you shouldn't expect this to be a massive change to society. I think it's going to have a modest impact, and I think it's going to be the biggest of all of the other factors.
Yeah, actually, I have also got a similar feeling, you know, because I also miss going now to Terry, you know, because of several reasons, you know, that there is a restriction between my place and Terry now. So those barriers are also there. But I do miss it. And also one is that because of my advanced age also, you know, that I have to take some precaution. So that, but still I miss it. So I agree with you on this. Now I'll come back to Professor Tiwari. You talked about this increased investment requirement on the public transport systems and also on the non-motorized transport systems. Will you think that there should be some kind of a policy push on having, you know, that though we know that there is a shortage of the public investments on this, and though the requirement is huge, but you know, some kind of those enabling policies where we are able to involve the private sector also, so that there is an increased investments, particularly for the augmenting the bus services, you know, and also reserving some kind of a road space for the cycle users, as has been done in some of these developed countries. So that also, you know, that we should try to do that. Professor Tiwari?
Yes. So, yes, that goes without saying, you know, even pre-COVID, one kept talking about increasing investment for public transport, increased number of buses. I mean, even pre-COVID, that requirement was there. But now, certainly, our understanding is that, you know, if we have to, I mean, there is no question, there is no if, we have to keep the public transport going in our situation, because there are a lot of people who do not have any other option. People don't, the vehicle ownership is not so high. So we have to keep it. I think the main requirement now becomes why it's important to invest in it, because we do not want just buses, but we want decongested buses. We want level of service A and B inside buses. That means you don't want to have more than 20, 30 people inside a bus. And that is only possible when you augment your fleet. So we have to keep ourselves ready for that. An important thing would be that if we are able to achieve level of service A and B, probably that may in fact attract more people in the long term to buses. A lot of people pre-COVID were discouraged using buses because they were crowded and not so comfortable. So that is important. I think for me, most important thing at this time, the real opportunity for us is to start experimenting, because the number of motorized trips on the roads are less. So this is just the right time to just put some temporary barricades and call it dedicated bicycle lanes. I think that one opportunity we should right away seize and do policy push, because bicycle in every way now, even in terms of encouraging distancing, gives you a very good opportunity. It has all the other benefits. It's been said by many people so many times. So this is the right opportunity to at least, because earlier always the argument was, where is the space? How will we provide for bicycle lanes? Okay, current with low volume, we do have that space. So let's put barricades on the leftmost lane and at least start experimenting, but have a roadmap to convert it to some more permanent networks very soon. So I think that kind of effort, I would certainly say that's an opportunity we should seize.
Yeah, I agree with you, Professor Tiwari. In fact, we should also do something about these flyovers, because the flyovers also a big irritant and deterrent rather to the cycle users. That I remember in Delhi, say 20, 25 years back, a large number of cycle users, particularly in the morning and evening, used to be there when there were no flyovers. Now the flyovers, that really is becoming, so we have to find out some answer to that also.
Flyover is, I think, not such a major issue, because at present we have got into a situation because of very car focused policies and designs, and trying to get rid of congestion, which always meant making speeds of motorized vehicles better. We've got ourselves into that situation. However, I think the current opportunity is, which Anvita was also talking about, we can seize this moment and at least start reserving spaces. And flyovers, there is always a ground under the flyover. So that could be prioritized for bicycles. So
Yeah.
those are details that one can work out. But at policy level, one has to push and come out very strongly that, all right, in the next 6 months, let's do this experiment. And in 1 year, we have a network and a plan how we will achieve this complete network, say in places like Delhi.
Thank you, Professor Tiwari. And now I go to Anvita. That while on buses, we have been listening all the time that these bus operators are the say our state transport operators, STUs, have been passing through the financial crisis, and because of the they say that the fares are very low. The government would like to keep the fares low so that the buses are more patronized. So how to overcome these kind of the financial crisis which they always face, because unless we find out the answers to that, there would be difficult to increase the number of buses on the streets, on the roads.
I think this has been, again, like Dr. Tiwari said, a pre-COVID question also. It's not only a COVID question. This is something that we've always struggled with. And I know that one of the good measures which many countries have implemented, and we also, the Ministry of Urban Development also wanted to work on it, is looking at how to cross-subsidize. So clearly, for example, when Ministry of Urban Development had tried to develop an urban transport fund, where you could collect the fees from parking, real estate development, etc., and use it to subsidize buses. I think right now and this is about buses, this is about people who are walking and cycling, is they are completely penalized for being sustainable. And the investments are not coming in. Whereas we have free real estate for parking, we give a lot of subsidies for car users in multiple ways by investing in flyovers. And so that level of cross subsidy and some kind of parity in terms of investment. So it's not that we don't have the money. Running buses is a social welfare function, like having healthcare services. And it has to be seen as such. This is never going to be a profit-making venture. But to invest in it requires that commitment from the cities, saying that mobility of everybody needs to be supported, And certainly walking and cycling, because they are occupying less space on the road. The bus users who are, occupying, are so energy efficient, are causing no harm to the environment. There has to be money put in. I don't think this going into, subsidizing parking and leaving the bus operators to fend for themselves is giving the right message in terms of what the policymakers or the city or the country wants to do. I know we've been going round and round this question for 20 years now. I mean, I've been, I know we were having this discussion, I think since I was in TRIP, we've been having these kind of discussions. They have been efforts, and it is important to, for the policymakers to set the right messages on this.
Yeah, thanks, Anvita. Now again, I go to Professor Currie. Professor Currie. Actually, I make the mistake of this the spelling. That I'm so sorry about it. All this, the Professor Graham Currie. Now that many people are asking about that. Okay, now what will be the future of the electric mobility, and then these driverless cars, etc. So these are the things, something new which we are talking about. So what are your views on this, Professor Currie?
Well, I think the future for electric mobility is the same as it was before. The world is transitioning towards this. It will still continue to do that. Largely, the manufacturers are going to be producing these things. And it's a good thing because, the environment in cities is going to be better. Autonomous vehicles, of course, the majority of autonomous passenger vehicles on planet Earth today are autonomous trains used in cities without drivers. So they will also be successful. I can't really say, I never have understood the logic behind autonomous cars. The biggest single problem Indian cities have today is single occupancy vehicles. And although there is a view that autonomous vehicles are shared, they're certainly not. And the shared mobility modes have very low occupancy. And of course, occupancy will be likely to be less in small vehicles while there is a pandemic and worried about infection. And in fact, occupancy has fallen. So, I don't see those as being solutions. I see what policymakers need to do here is recognize this pandemic will end. It will end. This is a temporary situation. It's very unpleasant, and we'll get over it just like we have other pandemics. And when infection stops, behavior will be the same way it was before. We'll still have crowding in public transport, and there's a need for governments to protect the infrastructure of cities and the way that we run transport systems, because our social life, our economic life is all run by cities. So they need to do things like subsidize public transport systems, develop railways so that we can have mass travel. And yeah, we'll have crowding on these systems again when the infection's all gone. But that will be in the long term, a 10-year time frame, I think.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now I go to Anvita. This is something a similar question which we have been getting from the various quarters, and they also now say that because of this social distance requirement, what would happen to the shared mobility? Because the shared mobility, we have been talking about solving the congestion problem particularly. What would happen to the shared mobility? Will there be any impact on that?
So like Professor Currie also pointed out, so we look at shared mobility in 2-3 ways. If we are looking at taxi services, the fact that we have people, multiple people using the taxi services in the day, but they are not using it at the same time, right? So if you have 2 people who can sit in the back seat of a car and move around, the taxi services I don't think will be impacted because the social distancing is always maintained. We don't really fill up our taxis. It's not like 4 people, 5 people sitting in it. But when we talk about IPT, I think that is where we are talking about shared mobility. And there I want to come back to what, Dr. Tiwari was also pointing out that we need, there's a lot of captivity in this. I don't think, you know, we still see pictures of people, 100 people in a bus where social distancing is a norm, but we still have people in the bus. So with the IPT service also, the informal modes or the shared mobility in terms of higher number of people, the rickshaws, the shared rickshaws, etc. I don't think we'll have a choice. Social distancing norms may not be able to overcome our need for mobility, and the only way for the policymakers to address this is increase the levels of service. So we may see more shared mobility coming onto the road. We may see more. So if one auto rickshaw can carry only 2 people, we will need 2 auto rickshaws to carry the 4 people who need to be moving from. So we will see more shared mobility coming on the road. It won't be less. It can't be less. There will still be people who cannot buy cars, you know. But if you allow me, sir, I also wanted to point out one of the things that has come to fore with these lockdown periods is the importance of mixed land use. Because we've really been, when we've been stuck in lockdown and we've been allowed only to go within our own precincts to buy what we need for our daily use. The inability to take a car and go to a mall, the inability to go long distances to buy just milk and bread and things like that. The importance of those small shops which serve our daily needs, the importance of having an ecosystem of pharmacies and grocery stores, etc., that allow for our daily needs, I think is an important thing for urban planners to also think of. And that may also in the long term reduce the congestion on the road, because you don't have to pick up your car to buy a liter of milk. You can actually walk to a store. So I think highlighting the importance of mixed land use and creating smaller ecosystems where people have their needs met is also critical at this time. Something for the policymakers to think about.
Yeah, thanks, Anvita. I have another question, a specific question for you from a participant. Would you kindly elaborate on the situation of the metro line in Riyadh in terms of the demographics of users and also the financial situation of the metro authority? So that is recovery of the initial investment. So if you have some idea about it, you can enlighten him.
In terms of the financial situation, again, this is an investment that has come completely from the government. This is not a private sector thing, right? So this completely comes as an investment of the government, and not only in the metro, but the bus system. And the perspective they have is a 100-year perspective. The idea they have is the fact that we are a very low density city right now, and we are consuming too much energy. And this is the investment in public transportation is not focused on recovery, but of finances. It's focused on creating a city which is more livable, walkable, and serving everybody. So it's coming very much top down as a social welfare and as an idea of shaping the city in a transit-oriented development kind of manner. So I don't think recovery is something that they are looking at this perspective. I do know that it's a very ambitious system. So 176 kilometer of metro line and about 10 times that much of bus transit services, which are covering about 60% of the entire city in terms of mobility. And their thought is to open it all up at the same time. Within, I would say, the next few months or a year. We don't have I don't have the exact date, so I cannot let you know on that. And I think with the COVID situation and the workers, etc., we may have some changes on the date. So I don't know about that. But that is the idea. And the Riyadh Metro is also been a commitment of, it's an NDC commitment of Saudi Arabia towards its climate change agenda. So there is a huge focus on public transit in shaping the city for Riyadh.
Thanks, Anvita. And now there is one question to Professor Geetam Tiwari. What do you think of the National Bus Rejuvenation Program of MORTH under consideration? And what components would you like to see in the same to strengthen bus-based public transport in Indian cities?
Professor Tiwari, you are mute.
Yeah. So MORTH bus rejuvenation program is hinged on two legs, I would say right now. One, they are looking into promoting more and more of electric buses, and second, more and more involvement of private sector. So I think there is a problem in this, because in our current situation, and something that we have to understand very clearly, because the demand is for these expensive systems is going to go down. People would not like to do out-of-pocket expenses on transport because of loss of income. So we'll have to understand that bus rejuvenation program should be based on recognizing public transport as a service sector, not as a business to make it more attractive for private sector to run it as a business and make profits out of it, either short term or long term. So those, I think there has to be a major shift, probably in my view. Otherwise, these programs are not going to have any major impact.
Yeah, Professor Tiwari, you can take another question also. This is about, is there any new signal from the policy makers that they are willing to boost investment in buses because of COVID? And what are the leverages narrative to push for more bus, cycling, walking infrastructure instead of only metro? I know this is your favorite subject.
Well, so far I don't see any, I think our policymakers they are not doing any medium or long-term thinking right now. It is all about firefighting right now, as you can see what's coming out every day. There is very little long-term thinking going into what should happen in medium to long term. And as Professor Currie also pointed out, we have to understand that this is a transient phase. We have to understand what will happen to our demand in short, medium term and long term, and be prepared for that. I don't see any cues coming out from policymakers to that end right now. Because at least I'm not aware of if MOUD or any states have come out with any policies how to augment and what to do about public transport, other than restrict the services. Even for metro in Delhi, you see, it's a very hazy policy right now, isn't it? Sometime in first week of July, we may start. But what I've seen in many other places going on, that public transport organizations are going all out to convince people how they are going to make the systems better and infection-free and more comfortable, trying to attract. I don't see any of that effort going on in Indian cities right now. So second point that, I think we have to, again, we have to find the correct policy of the stakeholder to whom we can put our white papers what to do of public transport and sustainable transport, because right now MOUD is not really being very proactive in this issue. And if we say that states have to take care of public transport because it's a local issue, anyway urban transport is a state issue, states have completely, they have become devoid of any revenues right now. So on one hand, we are saying it is a public sector, public investments are required, but where are these investments going to come from? So I think it's a very, we have to put our heads together and see who to approach There is an opportunity that I mentioned earlier, starting with even some small experiments. I think one of the participants mentioned this pop-up bicycle lanes.
What is
And
the meeting ID? वो दोबारा पूछ रहा है.
understanding the demand for buses and demand for walking and bicycling is only going to increase for all kinds of reasons that we have
I
discussed.
don't know whether I'm
So with all this, we have to put together that even just not a short-term response, but a long-term response has to be based on understanding of increase in demand and understanding that public transport is not to be run as a profit-making business, but as a public service. What changes are required from legislation, policy, and from investments?
So can you hear us?
Actually, I really don't know whether I'm audible or not.
Yes, you are.
Okay, okay. Then this one last question, which is again for Professor Tiwari, and because now we are already beyond the time allotted. How ready the Indian cities are equipped to, rather Indian cities are equipped to handle the new situation now. So this is the last question we are taking. And after that, all the questions which have been raised here, we'll try to answer them individually through their emails. Professor Tiwari?
I mean, new situation, as we mentioned, a new situation is, to me, this complete loss of employment opportunities, especially for informal sector in cities. This is a major new situation. And this has had a major impact on travel patterns. And then to say how well equipped the cities are, I think clearly they are not. Because I don't see any plan in cities trying to plan out as the economy revives, some of the informal sector returns, what is going to, how are we going to meet their requirement? I don't see any discussion on that at all right now. So I think our cities are not prepared for this. As I mentioned earlier, city level, state level, and national level, I don't think public transport has had a major importance in right now in thinking of policymakers or decision makers. I think everybody's so overwhelmed with firefighting of immediate situations of other dimensions, that this dimension, which is so heavily linked with, in fact, what happens to economy and other sectors, is being completely missed out.
Thank you, Professor Tiwari. In fact, we have a very rather engaging discussion on what would happen or what would not happen in the post-COVID situation. And in fact, really it has been very educative to me as well as to participants, I'm sure about it. Now I take this opportunity to thank our distinguished panelists and also the participants who have joined in a very large number today. And I'm sorry that we will not able to take all the questions which were posed to the panelists for the paucity of time. So thank you very much. And again, sometime we'll meet again for some other seminar or other webinar say connected with the transport issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we break out, I would just like to thank on behalf of Terry to you for moderating the session. And also my gratitude to all the speakers from different time zones. And just before we close, there was an interesting article that came out a few days back in terms of the sale of cycles in India. And we see quite a jump in sale of cycles in Haryana and Punjab, especially from the migrants who are relying on cycles to move to their faraway homes. And for sure, when they come back to cities, these will again be relying on cycles. And for that, particular thing in terms of, as ma'am said, we should build infrastructure for them who would be the captive users when they come back to cities. And we should be prepared for that. So thank you all. I also would like to thank the IT team, Mr. Veer Bahadur Singh, for facilitating this discussion. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.